What makes a place a place? Like, you know how you get all the feels when you go to a certain place?
This is the first house my wife and I ever bought, and every time I drive by it, oh man, I feel something, baby.
Well, that sense of place and how it's formed and what it means for geographical analysis of larger cultural patterns is exactly what this video is all about. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. So let's begin with some definitions. When we talk about placemaking, we're referring to the way that people modify the landscape in order to live in a particular location. And placemaking, as we talked about in the last video, is a crucial component to the formation of cultural landscapes. But a sense of place describes the act of filling a geographical location at any scale with meaning and significance. Oh, and by the way, if you want note guides to follow along with this video and all my videos, then check the link in the description.
Anyway, this house was built of wood and bricks, and it sits right here in the woods, and that is placemaking. But when I drive by here, this little box of brick and woods means something to me. Like, you'd probably drive by this house and you wouldn't even notice it. But for me and my family, this is the place where we took a risk and bought our first house. This is where my wife and I became parents. And I built that fence to keep my kids safe from the road. I mean, to be honest, it's pretty shoddy workmanship, but hey, I made it, and this contributes to my sense of place here. And this act of placemaking and developing a sense of place is not confined to one bald man on one street. No, entire cultures and regions engage in placemaking and fill those places with a sense of meaning.
And that sense of place then further defines how people engage in placemaking that helps maintain that sense of place, and the circle goes round and round. And when we talk about placemaking and sense of place on a more regional scale, there are three main factors that contribute to this process, and I'm here to tell you what they are. The first factor contributing to a sense of place is language. And a language is more than just vocabulary and syntax. A people's language is like a giant freight container which carries their culture, and that makes a huge factor in what makes a place distinct. For example, French people consider the French language to be an indispensable part of what it means to be French. Like, can you imagine walking into Paris and walking into a bakery and hearing the guy behind the counter say, "All right, we got some crepes and baguettes, what y'all want?" No, that's emphatically not what Paris is, and we know because of their language. But then on a more regional level, different dialects of the same language can contribute to a sense of place as well. Now, a dialect is just a regionally distinct way of speaking a language. For example, the English language is kind of dumb in the sense that we have no distinct word for the plural of you. But in different regions of America, for example, various dialects have overcome this difficulty. In the South, we say y'all, but in the Midwest, they say you guys, and then in Pittsburgh, they say yins. All these dialects of American English contribute to a people's sense of place. Okay, now religion is the second factor contributing to a people's sense of place. A people's religion causes them to organize their space in unique ways to their belief systems. For example, in the United States, where Christianity is the dominant religion, we can see regional differences. Up here in the Northeast, there are strong expressions of Congregationalism, which reflects the expression of Christianity first established by English settlers in the 1600s. But in the South, Congregationalism is almost non-existent. Instead, we find Baptists and Methodists in huge numbers here, and that's because traveling preachers from those denominations were abundant during the founding of our country. Or over in India, Hinduism is the dominant religion. And for all these different expressions of religious belief, their adherents modify the built environment with churches or temples or whatever, and they create sacred spaces and contribute to their sense of place. And then the third factor contributing to a people's sense of place is ethnicity, which, when being defined, is a common cultural background that creates a sense of belonging among a people. For example, the massive Somali immigrant population of Minnesota established a mosque long ago that has become part of their neighborhood's cultural landscape. And there they worship, they have a school, and they host community events, all of which contribute to their sense of identity as Somalis. Okay, now each of these three factors, language, religion, and ethnicity, can either serve to unite people or drive them apart, and that's what we need to talk about next. If those factors bring people together, that's what we call centripetal forces. So in terms of religion, as I mentioned earlier, Hinduism has been a strong force binding Indians together, especially since the end of British colonial domination. In terms of language, for example, Spanish is spoken in many places throughout Central America, and despite their regional cultural differences, that shared language has had a binding effect on this region. In terms of ethnicity, for example, over 90% of the Chinese population is ethnically Han, which has served as a powerful force to help them maintain their cultural heritage. But on the other side, when those three factors drive people apart, we call them centrifugal forces. In terms of religion, in many countries where Islam is dominant, there can often be tension and sometimes violence between two different sects of Islam, namely the Shia and the Sunni. They have this ancient beef over who the legitimate successor of Muhammad was, and that has been the source of lots of conflict throughout history, even though they're both expressions of the same religion. In terms of language, there have been various attempts of the United States to pass a bill declaring English as the official language of Americans. And those attempts typically emerge when English-speaking Americans begin to feel threatened by growing minorities threatening their culture by speaking other languages, Spanish being the most prominent among them. And then in terms of ethnicity, differences can sometimes lead to violence, as it did during the Rwandan genocide in 1994. European colonial powers had long exacerbated the tension between the Tutsi and the Hutu ethnic groups in Rwanda, and after they had established their independence, Hutus systematically killed about 500,000 Tutsis. Okay, click here to keep reviewing for Unit 3, and click here to grab my video note guides, which will help you get all the content of this course firmly crammed into your brainful. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.